Hello everyone, welcome to my talk entitled Sensory Modality of Input Influences the Encoding of Motion Events in Speech but not Co-Speech Gestures. We experience objects and events through multimodal input. We see space around us and also hear and touch it. Imagine you hear an event without seeing what's happening. Or you might watch the same event without sound. Or you might watch the same event together with its sound. Do you conceptualize this event similarly in all these conditions? We aim to answer this question in this study, and we know that perceptual channels have different affordances. Compared to auditory input, vision has the advantage of providing simultaneous, precise, and detailed information for both close and distant space. And visual information is continuously accessible to update information such as motion, location, and spatial relations. Thus, vision provides high spatial acuity. On the other hand, audition provides sequential information, but it has some advantages compared to vision, such as providing high temporal acuity. It's considered that because vision provides high spatial acuity, it mostly dominates spatial perception. In the present study, we ask, given these qualitative perceptual differences between modalities, whether sensory modality of input influences linguistic encoding of spatial information. We compared motion events presented as audio only, visual only versus multimodal stimuli, so visual plus audio, and we examined speech and co-speech gestures for path and manner of motion. Path and manner of motion are distinct spatial notions, thus modality of input could affect their encoding differently in speech and gesture. Yet no study has systematically investigated this issue before. Another goal of our study was to experimentally test how people express auditory motion events using iconic gestures. Because iconic gestures is effective tool to convey visual, spatial, and motor information, because they represent such information directly from a mental image. And many gesture production theories claim that gesture depends on visual spatial imagery, thus occur more frequently during the expression of spatial and motor information. In addition to these, we also know that type of language determines which spatial features of events are expressed in speech and gesture. For example, Turkish is a verb-frame language and encodes path in the main verb and manner optionally in a subordinate verb or adverbial. And segmentation of path and manner also holds for gesture. Turkish people mostly produce path gestures even if manner is mentioned in their speech. Gesture production has been mostly studied using visual stimuli such as video clips, cartoons, line drawings, and so on, but it's possible that focusing only on visual modality to understand the nature of gesture might create a modality-specific bias. But no study has addressed this issue before, for example, whether speakers produce similar types and frequency of gestures when they express non-visual spatial information. A few language studies show that when people rely exclusively on non-visual spatial information, their representations reflect the nature of visual input. In one study, researchers asked blind, sighted, and blindfolded children to give route descriptions for familiar locations in their school, and such as how to get to gym from the classroom, and they measured children's speech and co-speech gestures. They found that sighted and blindfolded children's speech were more global, and they didn't segment path into landmarks. Also, children produced gestures such as showing a left turn together with their speech. On the other hand, blind children's descriptions were more sequential, so they segmented path into landmarks, and they didn't gesture. Results also show that when children gave segmented verbal description, regardless of their visual status, they produced fewer gestures. Researchers claim that this happens because gesture captures a representation as a global whole, but it's also integrated with speech. Thus, when speech is sequential, it's not well suited for gesture production. However, it's not clear from these results whether the differences in the encoding of spatial information arise from the long-term effect of blindness or the nature of input at encoding. In the present study, we ask how Turkish speakers represent spatial information in their multimodal language based on auditory or visual input. We compared verbal and gestural expressions of path and manner for motion events presented as audio-only, visual-only, or multimodal stimuli. Our main goal was to compare audio-only versus visual-only stimuli, but we also included a multimodal condition, and this enabled us to further test the dominance of vision. If vision alone provides enough information about events, then we wouldn't expect any difference between the conditions of vision-only versus multimodal. We predicted that if the sequential nature of auditory input affects encoding of path, as found in earlier studies, participants in the visual-only and multimodal conditions would produce fewer mentions of path in their speech compared to participants in the audio-only condition. Second, if vision provides richer information about manner, participants in the visual conditions might mention manner more often compared to participants in the audio-only condition. For gestures, if gesture production depends only on visual spatial information, we would expect higher gesture frequency for both path and manner in the visual conditions compared to participants in the audio-only condition. But it's possible that, in addition to these predictions based on stimulus affordances, motion event typology of Turkish also affects encoding of path and manner differently. As encoding of path is more essential in Turkish, but manner is optional, manner expressions might be more susceptible to any effect of input modality compared to path, and this prediction holds both for speech and gesture. We recorded 12 locomotion events with 3 different manners, such that walk, run, and leap. And these events were the ones that you watched in the very beginning of this presentation, and participants in the audio-only condition only listen to the sounds of events, and participants in the visual-only condition only watch the event without its sounds, and participants in the multimodal condition both watched the events and heard the sounds. We had 15 participants in each condition, and participants were asked to describe each event. They were told that another participant would watch their descriptions and watch or listen to the same events and be asked to match descriptions with events. But there were no instructions about gesture use. To code speech, we first divided event descriptions into clauses, and then each clause was coded as relevant if they included locomotion descriptions. Then each relevant clause was coded for path and manner use. We also coded gestures, but only iconic gestures, and divided them into 3 as path-only, manner-only, and path plus manner together gestures. So path-only gestures only represent the motion of event, manner of gestures only represent manner of event, and path plus manner gestures represented both manner and the path at the same time. Before comparing the groups for path and manner use, we first look at the frequency of motion event descriptions among all descriptions. So for this, we calculated a ratio and divided the total number of motion event descriptions by the total number of all descriptions. And we found an effect of input modality. Our results show that participants in the visual-only and multimodal conditions produced more motion event descriptions compared to participants in the audio-only condition. Then we looked at how participants express path and manner in their speech. We calculated a ratio again by divided the total number of path and manner mentions by total number of motion event descriptions. And we found a significant interaction between the input modality and the type of expression. Participants in the visual-only and multimodal conditions expressed more manner than path in their speech, but this was not the case for participants in the audio-only condition. Participants in the audio-only condition actually had a tendency to produce more path than manner, and they actually produced more path information in their speech compared to participants in the multimodal condition, but not compared to participants in the visual-only condition. For gestures, we again first compared two groups in terms of gesture ratio per motion event descriptions, and for this we created the ratio and divided the total number of all gestures by the total number of motion event descriptions. And our results show that there is no effect of input modality on gesture ratio, because there was no difference between the groups. Then we looked at types of gestures participants produced, and we again calculated the ratio for each type of gesture per motion event descriptions. And the results show that, regardless of the condition, all participants produced more pet-only gestures compared to manner-only and manner plus pet gestures. So there was no effect of input modality. In the present study, we investigated how Turkish speakers represent spatial information in their multimodal language based on different sensory input. We found that speakers produce more motion event descriptions when they watch the events compared to when they only listen to the sounds of the events. This shows that speakers provide richer linguistic information when visual information is present. Thus, this finding fits the claims that vision dominates in spatial language, at least in the domain of space. There was also qualitative differences as predicted. We found that participants in the audio-only condition mentioned more pets than participants in the multimodal condition. So as predicted, participants' speech were more sequential in the audio-only condition. This finding is also informative about the earlier findings in blind studies, suggesting that sequential speech in spatial language partly depends on the nature of input at encoding. We also found that Turkish speakers were more likely to mention manner than pet in the visual conditions compared to auditory condition. Considering the Turkish typology, this is an interesting finding, because in Turkish, pet is more essential, but manner is optional. Thus, this suggests that input modality affects speakers' encoding of spatial events in verbal descriptions. For gestures, we found that auditory spatial input can elicit similar frequency of gestures as visual input. Thus, speakers can build gesture representations from auditory input alone. We also found that, regardless of the condition, speakers produced more pet-only gestures compared to manner-only and pet plus manner gesture. This finding is consistent with Turkish gestural patterns reported in earlier studies, but this also means that there was no effect of input modality on gesture type. So the gesture results diverge from the speech results, because in speech we found speakers in the visual conditions mentioned manner more than pet, but there was no increase in the manner gestures due to the increase in speech. As a conclusion, in the present study, we showed that the modality of input matters for verbal descriptions of motion events. And it seems vision foregrounds manner more than pet, even in a verb-framed language such as Turkish. And in addition to language typology, stimulus affordances affect event conceptualization. Yet, input modality does not seem to affect gestural conceptualization. But further studies should examine these effects of input modality in another language such as English, a satellite-framed language. Thank you for your attention, and I want to thank my supervisors as well.